Today it's all about Fassionola, Passionola, and the hurricane. And today we have a guest, co-author of Passionola, The Torrid History of Cocktails' Most Mysterious Ingredient, Gregorio Pantoja. All right, so welcome and thanks so much for coming.
Totally excited to be here and talk about the new book, Passionola, and mix some cocktails.
So before we get into the book and kind of how this all started, the Passionola versus Fassionola, just want to let everyone know that we will later be making and drinking a hurricane, and not just any hurricane, the original printed recipe for the hurricane from 1940. And we'll both share some of the history behind the hurricane, since most people don't know the real history of the hurricane. And your book covers that in a level that I think has never been done before. Plus, I have something interesting that we talked about beforehand about the hurricane that I just kind of found 2 days ago. Before we get to the hurricane, let's talk a little bit about your book, Passionola, and if you could share with everyone, like, how did it start?
All right, so I wrote Passionola and co-authored the book with Martin Lindsay, who formerly wrote the book 90 Years of Classic San Diego Tiki. Started out of curiosity, making cocktails, having a home bar, having a history working in bars and restaurants. And as I started to dive deeper into tropical and tea cocktails, I found this ingredient called Fassionola. And there wasn't a lot of information on it, but I really wanted to know what this ingredient was in order to make my cocktails as authentically as possible. And that's really where that journey started.
What I think is funny about tiki tropical cocktails, we're like so exact with following like Don the Beachcomber, Trader Vic. Everything has to be exactly this. And people are talking about like, whoa, the rum's from Martinique, or it should be this. And then everyone's just like, a Fassionola is just, it's whatever. Like, you can kind of do whatever. And I kind of saw everyone talking that way, and it's been about a year. I did a hurricane here, and I knew your book was coming out, so that was like it was my attempt to. It's like, I'm just going to make my own Fassionola while I can, because eventually there's going to be kind of a definitive story about Passionola and Fassionola. So the big question I have, the big question everyone has, hopefully you can share a little bit. What is Fassionola?
So Fassionola is more of a broad generic term that most of us today or currently know the syrup as, but in its origins, it's Passionola. And in the short of it, Passionola is like Coke. Okay. And then you have all the things after that called cola that are that, broader in interpretation of what the original recipe was.
So Passionola is like the name brand Coca-Cola. Fassionola is the store brand colas.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's like it could be anything and everything you want it to be, whereas Passionola is a very specific collection of ingredients.
And you can find, like, I've seen this online, you shared in the book, you can find advertisements for Passionola that predate any usage of Fassionola. So back to Passionola. Passionola was a brand name, and it is now a brand name as well, correct?
Yeah, it's trademarked just like Coca-Cola.
So you guys have trademarked Passionola, so it's distinguished itself from the more, general Fassionola.
Right.
And you have your own Passionola syrup that people can now buy. We'll put a link up on the screen and in the episode description. And Doc Parks, he told me he would share with the audience the secret recipe. Are you willing to do that?
As much as possible.
Yeah, so Doc was here before. That did make an appearance here before when Doc came and did the Banana Afterlife and, secret recipe. But you have your own recipe that you were kind of sharing me earlier, that it's not just made up out of, you didn't just make your own Passionola out of thin air.
No, through our research, we were able to come across the original recipe. And at that point in our research, I reached out to Martin and said, hey, can we get our attorney in seeing where the trademark is at with Passionola? Because if we have the original recipe, we should be making that syrup, but we can only make this work if we're able to trademark the original name. We were able to get that done. And from there, I made a short list of the top 5 mixologists in the US that I wanted to work with. And at the top of that was Doc Parks.
And Doc has kind of his own rich history of using Fassionola, at Pagan Idol, at Zombie Village, kind of like
Oh
integrating
yeah.
that into their menu from the start.
And he's the only one that I came across in my research with looking for somebody to work with. There's a bar here or there,
Mhm.
scattered throughout the U.S. where you can find one Fassionola, but at Doc's, Pagan Idol, Zombie, and at Wilfred's, there were multiple. We're talking like 5, 6 cocktails,
Yeah.
which was unique,
Yeah.
and that immediately told me he's very interested in this specific
Yeah.
ingredient, unlike anybody else.
Yeah, yeah.
Doc was adamant about this particular ingredient, and so that was why he was top of my list. And thankfully, when I reached out to him, he was really on board with getting into the passion.
And he did share here when I was prodding him for information, obviously that there's passion fruit in it. And then I think the exact words he used were fruit from the Great Pacific, which I thought was
Awesome.
like so funny.
Other tropical things you might find in the Pacific.
Yeah.
In the
Okay.
Great Pacific.
All right. So as I was reading the book, I did pick up that it's not just a tiki book, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was the first thing that I said to Martin is I don't want to write another tiki book. In all, it really is a book about American history, culture, cuisine, film, the mob, different locations. You go from Hollywood to New York to Miami through different time spans, and it gets a little international when we look at going to places like England and in Australia, New Zealand,
Yeah.
in the whole story of what Passionola is.
I guess, yeah, there's a bunch of like passion fruit history that goes overseas. And I guess this is a great lead in to going overseas, because the thing we're going to kind of make here today, the cocktail we're going to make, is the hurricane. And the hurricane has its own timeline. And this is a timeline that it could evolve over time. People find more things, but your book found some things that I'd never seen, including the first mention of the hurricane in a book. It's from 1930, and it's Cocktails by Jimmy. And it's a recipe that has creme de menthe, Scotch whiskey. It has lemon juice in it, but the question I always have when I see this, and I'd like your opinion here, is like, how relevant do we think that cocktail is to the evolution of the hurricane that we know? And the hurricane that everyone knows is Pat O'Brien's for the most part.
Yeah, and that's true. Pat O'Brien's hurricane is the hurricane, the most famous hurricane that's been replicated all over the world. So in the story, Martin Lindsay started diving into the 1939 World's Fair and some of the information that was coming out about that possibly being the origins of the hurricane. Well, he was in New York. In the archives, he found the other recipe that took him further back to England. But although it's not the same recipe, the only thing that leads from the English version to the Pat O'Brien's, or what we know today, is the lemon component. But the name hurricane helps us identify what was happening in that tropical sensation that was happening, not just in America, but what was happening in other parts of the world, in that whole idea of being a drifter or a beachcomber and living that tropical dream life.
And it's funny, when you look back to like pre-Don the Beachcomber, you find instances of like tropical things, but they haven't yet evolved to what we think of like the big, like spicy fruit juice rum drinks. They're often like the names you find of things, or the bars have those names, but they're still in that, pre-prohibition era cocktails. So that's 1930. Now in 1932 in Baja California, there's another hurricane, and I think it's in the book, and Martin found it. It's like identical to the one from Cocktails by Jimmy, which who knows how that happened, but it's the book was out there, so that book existed.
Right.
So sort of the same. Then moving forward to 1937, there's a huge blockbuster movie that comes out called The Hurricane.
That's a great film too.
Yeah. So I've not seen The Hurricane, but it's touched upon in the book. It's sort of, I think in general, worldwide, like people are getting into this sort of tropical sensation, and that's sort of leading into things. So that movie has like a foundational role, correct?
Yeah, it's true. And we go back to Don the Beachcomber, who was working on the sets in Hollywood because they were working with him as a consultant in, the tropical aesthetic, which he had known through his world travels. And so really he came in at the right time at the end of Prohibition with these rum drinks and creating all of these tropical drinks that were based off of these names that were very rare.
Now, moving on to the timeline here, in 1939, a movie comes out that's called Naughty But Nice, and this movie features a drink called the Hurricane, but we never get the recipe for it. It's said to be rum and lemonade type of drink. That's something I've read before. It's on Wikipedia. Last year, I remember watching scenes from that movie, and you don't really see them make the cocktail, but the main character is drinking a cocktail, so nothing definitive. But just a couple days ago, I found a Warner Brothers press book for the film, which features press clippings and even marketing ideas for theaters. It says, here's a quartet of ideas to capture the attention of local jitterbugs. Take your choice or use them all. There's a dance contest, there's gags, there's displays, stunts, and even a plug a new drink. Drugstores and bars may be induced to feature a new drink, a hurricane, after the kind Dick Powell freely imbibes with plenty comic results in Naughty But Nice. And then it says, the hurricane is actually a zombie drink made with white rum. So we have the Hurricane movie, and then this other movie comes out, and there could be other movies that had a hurricane cocktail in it, right? We don't really know. But what's kind of interesting is this is sort of laying down more of a foundation for a tropical rum style of a hurricane. So moving forward, in 1939 to 1940, there's a World's Fair in New York, and this is where I guess we don't have a lot of evidence that the exact hurricane that we know of is featured there, but there's a hurricane bar that is a special hurricane cocktail for 75 cents. And that seems like where it may have become the popular drink we know today.
Yeah, I think that was such a huge event that having the hurricane cocktail there is what helped spread its notoriety. And it's that place that I think most cocktail historians agree was the inception of the hurricane in its current iteration that we know today.
Yeah, the big rum passion fruit cocktail. And that leads us into the first printed recipe of the hurricane, which is the Hurricane Punch. It's from the Ron Rico Meekstro's Guide from 1940. And what's interesting is your book covers this, is that the gentleman who was running, I don't know if sales or marketing for Ron Rico at that time, he was at the World's Fair, right?
Yeah.
And my hypothesis in Ron Rico is that these guys were going around the country collecting recipes. They have a zombie, and the zombie is not Don Zombie, but it could be Monty Proser Zombie, who, guess what? Like at the World's Fair had a bar there. So that's the first time we see a printed hurricane. It's 1 ounce of lime juice, 1 ounce of lemon juice, 2 ounces of passion fruit syrup, and then 4 ounces of a 90 proof rum, which that's like the hurricane template right there. It's like,
yeah, it is.
That's
the
rum.
Blueprint. Yeah, because every variation really just runs off of that from this point on.
Yes, and I've put that out there before. My feeling is that this bar guide may have been on the bar at Pat O'Brien's in New Orleans, but we can almost definitively say that the story that Pat O'Brien's tells, which is a World War II thing, they didn't have bourbon, so they used rum instead. There's such a coincidence in that recipe from 1940 to theirs. It seems hard to believe that they didn't get that from there. Your book also points out to another book, The How and When, but they copied that in like the early 40s. They copied directly from Ron Rico. So we kind of have a more, I think, direct lineage to Ron Rico recipe. But it really does seem like they didn't create it, that they got it from the World's Fair, maybe.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, it's really, and we'll let the readers decide for themselves. But in the story of the hurricane, you see that it's really the World's Fair that becomes a red letter date when you start to see all these other hurricanes really popping up in these different recipes, and not just in bars, but in places or with rum makers like Ron Rico, as you noted.
So let's go ahead and we're going to make that hurricane. We're going to be using the Passionola syrup. That's the trademark Passionola syrup. I'm going to use a drink mixer for this one, and I'm going to start with 1 ounce of lime juice, 1 ounce of lemon juice, 2 ounces of Passionola syrup, or you can sub in a passion fruit syrup. Red Ron Rico is called from the recipe. It's 90 proof. It's a dark and heavy-bodied. It's the driest heavy-bodied class of rum from Ron Rico. And we don't have that, so we decided to sub in 3 ounces of Bacardi 8 and 1 ounce of Worthy Park 109, which brings you to just over 87 proof. And there you go, the Hurricane Punch from the Ron Rico Guides from 1940. All right, thanks for coming. Cheers.
Cheers. Delicious.
It is delicious. It is not, there's like, the acidity is like, there's a little burn from the acidity, which I kind of like,
Yeah.
but it's not too sweet. There's 2 ounces of the Passionola syrup, which I think you would think is too much, but we're talking about, we got 4 ounces of rum, 2 full ounces of citrus juice. As well.
Right, which really cuts it well. And again, it's not too sweet. It's not overly sweet. So I think with that blend of the Bacardi 8 and Worthy Park 109, I think it helps balance that out as well.
Yeah, the 109 really punches through. That's helping. Yeah, I mean, it's bringing up ABV,
Well, you get that on
obviously.
the back end. Just
Yeah.
a little of that warmth.
There's a lot of, and I'd say this in a good way, there's a lot of like, for me at least, like a lot of burn going on from the citrus. Because passion fruit, Passionola, passion fruit syrups, they're going to have some acidity in them as well. And then, 2 ounces of the juice plus that Worthy Park 109. For these, what people kind of think is resort drinks, which it's not really like historically a resort drink or a hotel bar drink. It's great. It's way more balanced than most of those. And I think it probably gets somewhat of a bad rap because of like modern day Paddle Brian's.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you go. What is it?
Bourbon Street and
Bourbons,
and
Paddle Brian's, Bourbon Street. Our friend was just talking about how when he's gone to New Orleans, he get like that. Was it like a yard?
Yeah, and it goes along the other cocktail there. It's like the hand grenade. There's just all these like overly sugary cocktails that have people become used to, like the frozen daiquiri. I think I made this spec before in a cocktail here on YouTube, and that was something. I think I did that, and I used my own Fassionola. But that Fassionola that I made, it was like heavy on strawberries, because that seems to be the trend. Is to have, even though we know now it's the original Passionola, wouldn't have been like that. And even the red isn't strawberry based, right?
No.
It's cherry based.
Yeah,
so the strawberry thing is kind of, I think it tastes good and it's interesting, but it's not historically. There's no references or sources that point to strawberries being used in any of the old Fassionola or gold or red Passionolas.
Right, yeah. Well, with Passionola, it can be anything.
That's the thing, yeah. Passionola is a specific thing.
Very specific
Fassionola
ingredients,
is whatever you want it
It's
to
kind of
be.
like make at home, have fun with it, enjoy it. Yeah.
And I like that too. And that's like if you pick up a lot of some of Doc's recipes, you can use like mango or other fruit from the Great Pacific, as he would say. But this is an excellent hurricane. This is the original printed recipe that we know of. Now that could be disproven. Someone can find something in a book somewhere.
Next week, someone, something pops up on the internet, and there it goes.
So the original recipe that's shared for the Hurricane Punch from the Ron Rico Guides from 1940, using the new Passionola syrup. Can you tell people where they can find you and then where they can find your book?
Yeah, you can find us on ClassicSanDiego.com. You can find us on Passionola.com, Fassionola.com, on Instagram at p.fassionola or p/Fassionola.
And people can follow you as well on Instagram.
Oh yeah, so I have my own brand, Contigo Tiki Bar, which you can find at Contigo Tiki Bar. You can find us on Etsy at Contigo Tiki, as well as the ContigoTikiBar.com.
and you sell some cool stuff like these lanterns,
We have
which
some of those, yeah.
which we have. I'm all around here hanging out, and so go check them out for more. Check out the book. I've gone through the book from cover to cover, and there's so many things I didn't know in the book, and it's a great addition to cocktail history. So thanks for coming, and it was great sharing a hurricane with you, and you'll be back for more, right?
Definitely be back for more. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like below. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out the Patreon page to support this channel more. Check out the book, and otherwise, see you in the next one.